We have Paul with us, my colleague and co-author Willie Shaw with me as well, Al Shalloway. We're also super excited to have with us, super busy man, and I'll let Al introduce himself, but he's been a huge push for me to get more into value streams since November last year when we met in Atlanta. Then we've got Rod, who've also known for a while. Rod's from back east as well. I think you're not far from Paul, I guess.
Yeah, that's right, in London, Ontario.
London, Ontario. Brilliant. And then that's, I think, us. So we did have one other panelist who couldn't make it. I think it was emergency because he's always there, and that's Dave Shapiro out of New York, a colleague of mine as well. So I will start with Paul. Do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Paul Sims. I have had a 30-year career at the IBM Toronto lab. I got into Agile and Lean back in 2007. I guess the first time I discovered value streams and their power was around that time, and have been using them in the context of working with clients to help them understand parts of their process that just are not as efficient as they think they are. There are a lot of things that might be hidden to a client, and when you actually use a tool like this, it makes those things visible. So it's been a great experience, and being able to use the tool to show companies how they can actually improve. You're on mute.
Thanks. I'll just keep an eye in case people are trying to get in and are unable to. So multitasking. Awesome. Thanks, Paul. And we're super excited for you to take the time out and be with us as well. You got so much experience. That's great. Willie, may I go next to you, sir?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Willie Shaw. I'm a bit and bytes engineer at heart, and one of the 4 agents of chaos. Since the 80s, my passion has always been to learn and to share and to strive for simplicity. And again, maybe it's simplistic, but I believe value streams are everywhere. And I'm most passionate about the continuous delivery pipeline, which I believe is fundamental to a healthy DevOps mindset, which leads back to my colleague Brent and the book we wrote.
Awesome. And it's been a pleasure working with Willie. I've known Willie now coming up 3 years, I think, coming up close to two and a bit. And then we bumped into each other at Vancouver DevOps. So that was, we just had similar views, and some not so exactly similar, but very much focused on making Agile and DevOps work for folks. So awesome. Thank you very much. Al, may I go to you, sir?
Sure. So I'm Al Shalloway. I started writing programs in 1970 when I started school, university, and formed net objectives in 99. I was really a developer then. That's mostly what I did up until about 2001, when I switched into realizing that the real problem wasn't the development team, even though there's a lot of stuff they need to learn how to do better. It's more the way the whole organization figures out what it's want to work on and how to give it to the development team. I think that handoff is horrendous. And so now I concentrate mostly on the whole business organization. How do you improve or achieve what we call business agility? But my past history as a dev for 30 years is quite useful to relate to developers when they talk about the problems they have, and even just knowing what their problems are. And I still have to put my hand into architecture every now and then, just because I've got a lot of experience there. You can never stop being an architect once you've been an architect. Plus, I'm very big in Chris Alexander's work, Timeless Way of Building. And although I'm not going to go into it in this session, what I did with the book I wrote with Jim Trott called Design Patterns Explained, which is still very current, even though it's almost 20 years old now. It's the only book that talks about why patterns work the way they do, not just what they are. But I found that the approaches we take now are based on the patterns thinking of Chris Alexander. I found this to be a very powerful design method, and I think I can relate a little bit of that when we talk about value streams in a little bit.
Brilliant. I'm just making a note. I think you mentioned Chris a number of times when we've talked about the value stream.
Yeah, if people ask, when I talk to people, if somebody asks, what's the most important book to read? It's Timeless Way of Building. Everybody talks about a pattern language. Forget a pattern language. I read a pattern language. Man, it was hard, and it wasn't that useful. Pattern language to me is brilliant in the sense that you get to see a lot of specific patterns and things. But Alexander has a design approach that's holistic and enables you to design pieces within the context of the whole. That I'm not saying he's the only one who does it, but he's the one who came up with it first. And I've been using it now for, I guess 24 years. And I've never I'm always looking for where does it not work. I find that when you get some really good tool, it's so easy to fall in love with it. You've got to become skeptic to your own cognitive bias. So I'm always looking to try to figure out, well, maybe it doesn't work here. Maybe it doesn't work there, but it always works. And every time I do that skepticism, I learn how to use it better. And I would say the work I'm doing now, the reason I'm very excited about Disciplined Agile Flex is it's actually based on a different way of design. I mean, than other approaches are, and it's based totally around the value stream and how you have the pieces relate to each other based on Alexander's work. It's a fun book to read. Timeless Way of Building. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, I just made a note. So afterwards too, I'm going to pull together some of the text, hopefully salient points. Although I'm cognizant of my keyboard making a lot of distracting noise while I do that, so I got to be aware of that. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Al. And yeah, we're stoked to have you here with us. Really, one of the key gurus in this space, I have to say. Great. And Rod, sir, thank you so much for also with your years of experience. You want a quick introduction?
Sure. My pleasure to be here. I'm really quite excited to be a part of this group. Like Al, I can trace my beginning in software development back to about 1970, but I wasn't paid for doing it until I was towards the end of the 70s. At that point, I began a full-time career in development, software engineering, whatever we wanted to call it at the time. I can remember doing absolutely everything, including pinning the ends of serial cables, because that's what we had to do as a part of just building complete systems, right? I see lots of nodding heads because we've got enough gray hairs here. We remember that, right, guys?
I do.
Yeah. So I'm not a sharp tool in the tool shed as Al, because it wasn't 2000 or 2001 when I figured out this whole business of value streams. It was more like 2010. And at that point, I kind of had this generalized notion that there are people that request value, and then it heads off into some stream of work, and it comes back around till the value is delivered. And so in a general sense, I had this notion that in that stream, there's a lot more going on than just the development code. And it was at that point I started looking around for this concept of value streams. And it wasn't until I stumbled into the work of people like Karen Martin and the like, who had started taking those concepts from a lean community based in manufacturing and applying it now to things like software, that it really started to gel in my head. So I use it all the time now, particularly to try to illustrate to groups when they're trying to find a way to make the developers code faster or the testers test faster, that really the problem might lie elsewhere within this big stream or this chain. And most recently worked with a large client who was complaining about 28 months to get some value delivered. And I was able to show them through a value stream mapping exercise in a big boardroom with Post-it notes. And we spent the better part of a morning charting it all out forensically after the fact to show that 28 months, 24 months was spent in non-development and testing activities. And that kind of punctuated the whole thing for me at that point. Okay, I think I get it. So I'm pretty excited to be on the same panel with people like Paul, who I've worked with for some time, and particularly Al. Really enjoying, this isn't intended as a plug, Al, but really enjoying the Value Stream Consultant workshop you've been working on. It is gold.
Perfect. Oh, happy to have you. And I'm just going to quickly mention too, because we've only got a few other people right now on the video. I've just seen more people actually RSVP. They might think this is next week. I don't know, but they just RSVPing as we speak, which is kind of interesting. And I did put the meeting invite in there just so they could get to it from meetups. But anyways, I know Bjorn, you've been working with Agile for a number of years. You want to say a quick hello?
Sure. Yes, I actually know most of the people on the panel here. So I've worked at the same company as Rod, companies. I'm Scott Damlin Associates and Disciplined Agile Inc. I did some in my previous life before January this year. I was an agile coach consulting with organizations. So I did some work together with Paul in Guelph, Ontario at the Cooperators. And now I work with PMI. So I'm doing some work with, not really with Al, but we're kind of in, around Al, and we're doing some collaborations there as well to form us. So what I do now is that I'm a development lead of what we call the DA tools. So it's a tool set behind, to create the structures and the content of the Disciplined Agile process. So we're in the process of also pouring or adding, what do you call it? Al, help me out. The Flex value stream stuff into there as well. So I'm here not primarily as a value stream consultant. I'm here more to be a little bit of a fly on the wall and listening to the conversations and all the great minds, how they, as you think through and talk through the whole problem complex. I've always had a bit of a problem with the concept of project. It always tends to get in the way of productivity and how we tend to work with, in development organizations. I'm still a developer, so it's I look at it the problem from that perspective. That's me.
Awesome, thanks, and I really appreciate you jumping in as well. And just a little plug on the tools. The DA tools, I mean, they use all the time. We use the DA browser. That's just part of the toolkit for the toolkit, so to speak. That
Cool.
we're really excited about hearing the updates that are going to be happening with that. And you know what? A lot of times, just walking people through the process of what does it mean to be agile? What are the terminologies? How does this kind of work? We start with the tool, so and show that right off the bat. So excellent.
Perfect. Yeah.
Awesome to have you. Last, I'm going to mention Blaine because I've been working with Blaine now for over 3 years. Blaine has got to go to another, I think he's hosting another meetup after, so he's been a trooper here to jump in, and I want to thank him for doing that, giving his time. He's also worked with me with the Attorney General here, BC Attorney General and Justice, actually creating value streams, and made a massive difference, but I don't want to jump ahead and give too much away now till we get to that question. But Blaine helped me develop those and had some good meetings. So Blaine, do you want a quick hello and introduction for yourself?
Sure, yeah. Blaine here. I go back to the 1970s like many of us are. My hair was grayer than it is today. I'm doing better. And I started in computer operations with a major bank here in Canada. And from operations, I went into development. And then from development, I went out to consulting. My expertise has been financial systems since I started with banking systems. So I'm a financial systems expert. I worked way back in the consulting firm that I was with last on RUP, was sort of my first iterative methodology, and really enjoyed that, completely bought into it. I had a good time, and I had no idea it was Scott Ambler involved. And then Brent introduced me to Scott and to Mark, and yeah, it's just been a continuation since the 90s of the agile and scaled agile methodologies. Thanks, Brent.
Thank you. Thanks, Blaine. That was awesome. Cool. All right, so let's get into the meat of this. What is value streams, and let's start a little bit about the confusion behind it. I know we had a little precursor to this, and of course we'll for the whole panel to chime in as well. But first of all, Al, I want to come to you because of this question, and this is something that, when Willie and I were writing about this 2 years ago, we started the book process 2 years ago. We actually talked about how important value streams are. And I just want to say one thing is right away when I saw net objectives and how about effective organization, Willie and I were writing about effective teams, effective organizations. This just really resonated with me. So what is a value stream and why the confusion today?
Okay, well, I'll first of all say that if you've heard what a value stream is from SAFE, ignore what they say because they obscure the most important part of what a value stream is. And I've found that there are two very, very critical concepts in Agile. One is what we call the minimum business increment. I'm going to say why that's important in this conversation on value streams. It's not an MVP. An MVP is, by Eric Ries anyway, is the idea I'm trying to build something small and discover if it's a value. And in fact, that all starts talking about value streams. In other words, you got the developer group trying to decide if something's a value, so they get an idea and they build it, the ideas toward what the customer wants, and they build it and they try it and they have a very quick return because the MVP is very small, and they build it, they get the idea from the customer, they build it, they show it to the customer. That's the value stream right there. The idea from the customer, or rather for the customer, might come from them, might come somewhere else, but it's for the customer. You do some work, you give it to the customer, and actually the value stream doesn't end when you give it to them. Mary Poppins called it concept to cash, but that's actually was an incomplete statement. You can get paid for it, but what you really want is a value stream where they realize value themselves. If you're doing concept to cash, great, you're making money, customers getting no value. It's not the way to think about it. I like to call it concept to consumption. They consume, they get value from it. So it's called a value stream because at the beginning it's an idea, and as you go step by step, you add more to it. Now, the value stream definition I use is the one that's been out there for 70 years. When something's got a long heritage, you've got to be very careful about changing it just because it sounds cool and good marketing stuff. But step back for an instant. What we do with Discipline Agile Flex, Flex is our approach for Agile at scale. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of these terms. There's flow, there's lean, there's theory of constraints, there's organizational development. The value stream is critical because if you think about it, one of the lessons we have from flow is you want to start and end as quickly as you can. You mentioned the, 28 hours or 28 months of work, of elapsed time, but 24 months you are not doing development or testing. Well, that's because 24 months you're waiting. Work waits a lot of times. In fact, the more busy people are, probably the more the work is waiting. So a value stream is not focused on the people, because if you look at the people, you're going to see busy, 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 busy. Oh man, we're so productive. We're getting all this stuff done. But in fact, the work for the idea until it gets there, it starts, it stops. It starts, it stops. And in fact, it stops. In your case, 24 divided by 28 times 100, it's probably about 80% of the time. It's just sitting there. So the value stream is a way that's, well, now I'm getting into value stream mapping, but the two are interchanged. The value stream map is a representation of the value stream, so you can see when is the work starting, when is it stopping. You're looking at the work. You're not looking at the people doing the work, just the workflow itself. That's very critical.
Exactly.
So flow, you can see, I want to shorten the time from start to realization of value. Lean tells us the way you do this is you reduce delays. A lot of people say lean's about eliminating waste. Well, yeah, but in software, it's about removing delays. In fact, even in the physical world, a lot of it is delays. Just in time, you've probably heard that. Waste comes from delays. And then theory of constraints, if you think about it, this was my big insight in 2001. I can still remember this. I trained about 100 people in a company in design patterns out of 200 developers. And I had a chance meeting with somebody about 6 months later. I mean, they liked me. They brought me back like 4 times. I did 4 courses, brought me back 3 times. And I asked her, I said, how's it going? I admit I was looking for strokes, but she said about as bad as ever. I said, okay, this is not good. And I asked her why. And what happened was the real problem wasn't the development team. The real problem was the interaction between the development team who were writing software for medical instrumentation, the hardware people, and the way they were interacting with each other created a log jam with the development group, but the cause was the hardware people. So it's like you have a jammed hose. It doesn't matter where the hose is jammed, it's jammed. And where it jams is not always where the problem is. Like you might have dirt coming into the hose. That's your problem, but it might be clogging the hose further down. That's where it shows up. So value streams are this way to holistically look at everything. It lets you directly work on flow as opposed to indirectly work on flow. By that I mean, look at Scrum. Scrum has you indirectly work on flow why you want smaller pieces. So we have time boxing. You got to get small. It tells you got cross-functional teams. So I eliminate the delays because I've got a whole team there. But it's better to know that a value stream is this combination of high flow, no delays, or as few as you can have, few handoffs, few handbacks, not have delays in workflow. And the value stream is a way of looking at it, and value stream mapping is a way of mapping it. So that's what's so important about it. In fact, when I go into a client, if I don't understand their value stream, I often can't really understand what's going on. They'll talk about, oh, we're messed up here, messed up there, but it's just like, sounds like a big mess. It's like being in a fog. Value streams will if you look at them, you can see where the blockages are and what's causing them.
Excellent.
Oh.
And you actually jumped in question 2. But before we get there, which is the difference between values, I wanted to mention one point, and then we'll open up to others who want to chime in on this. What I like about how you have presented this, and I've seen this in your presentations and in the courses we teach on Lean, is it's the value stream begins and ends with the customer in mind. And I think that could be nuanced, but actually it's powerful because it's in mind, meaning we may have value streams that don't touch the customer, but they eventually will bring some sort of, and we want to bring value to the customer, right? Not just monetize, as you said. So it's in mind, because without the customer, we just don't exist. Or if you're a service, a public service, then you're going to be thinking about your citizen. So beginning and end with your citizen, maybe, but maybe not. It's going to be the citizen in mind. So I like that. It's subtle, but it's really powerful.
Yeah, there are a lot of times where people talk about value streams. What they really mean, it's a part of the value stream. So like, look at a Scrum team. Scrum team's not working on a value stream. It's got the subset of the value stream for when things come into the Scrum team until they give it out for implementation. But all that work beforehand, the portfolio, the product management, that's also the same value stream. In fact, Scrum was intended to, one of the intentions rather of Scrum is to say, well, I can have this team and work on it and isolate them from the interruptions that you get from product management and product ownership. But see, one of the problems is Scrum, in fact, I hadn't really thought about it quite this way. What people tend to forget, Scrum is inspired by the article, The New Product Development Game. Well, that tells you something right there, building new products. And the idea of Scrum, when it was first created in the new product development game, it was about how does a team working closely with a customer figure out what to build under the auspices of management. So the team was directly connected to the customer, worked on what they needed and gave it back. In that case, Scrum was the value stream. Now, 90% of the place where Scrum's used, Scrum's a small piece of the value stream, and we wonder why we're having troubles with it. It's like, okay, well, if you got a Phillips head screwdriver and you can't get it to work in a flathead screw, you can blame, then people say, well, it's not the Phillips screwdriver's fault. Well, yeah, it's not, but it's whoever's selling it, it's their fault. And we have to remember that. Now, I think that's the key is you always have to do that. Actually, I'm going to mention one other thing. It's not on the list of questions, but Paul will like this because I think he's the one who's been giving me a lot of grief about this in the past, is the idea of an operational value stream. Although it may not just be you, Paul, because I've had other people have given me grief on how I've explained this at times. Like if you're writing software for, say, a pizza company, how to make pizzas, how to deliver costs, we talk about the development value stream that's doing it. You want to realize that value stream is creating what we call an operational value stream, which is the customer who's ordering the pizza. And their value stream is quite different from the pizza maker's value stream. In fact, their value stream cuts across because they got the ordering, then it's got to be made, then it's got to be delivered. And you might have 3 different groups building, if it's a big, like a Papa John's or something, you might have a whole group building the phone ordering. You might have another group building the making of the pizza, another group building the inventory for the food for the pizza, another group for the delivery of the pizza. And this is now another problem because now you got 4 different groups worrying about their system, their value stream, but who's looking out at the customer? So that's another advantage of it because it's the customer and user experience that's so important.
I think that's a really important point, is that we have many value streams in our company, not just internal, external, and they can cut across, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. Where I think some others who have tried to, and I'm not calling them out, you are, but not picking on any particular framework, and that's good, because I bash a lot, so I'm trying not to bash today.
You're giving constructive suggestions. If they view it as bashing, that's their business. That's not what you're doing.
No, I'm joking about bashing.
I know. That's at least my stance for me.
Well, we're all heretics. We're all heretics, right? Because we, the 17. So this is my point I was going to get to actually about treating every. It's like a 17-page Scrum guide. That is the Bible for many in Agile, and everything's a rock. So they think, okay, we'll just use a hammer, right? So we'll use a hammer when everything's a nail. Excuse me, not a rock. You might use a rock instead of a hammer. But anyways, everything looks like a nail when you kind of view it through that lens, but that's not the case. And just with value streams, we can't view it just as one single connection at one point. There's lots, as we talked about, as I summarized a second ago. So, okay, panelists, in your day-to-day and over the years, have you heard confusion about value streams, or have people asked you what they are?
Well, I'll just pile in on what Al had already said and actually use my own experiences on it as well. I understand I'm basically dealing with an availability bias here when I do that, but I'm gonna do it anyway. And that's the idea that quite in another life, I worked on a small group of very focused developers to build multiple listing service systems for real estate boards. We were actually enormously successful to the point where we captured 50% of the Ontario market. And the way in which we did that was we were just basically filled with all kinds of hubris. We figured that if we could sit down with a couple of realtors and actually find out what they wanted in a system, we could just build exactly what they wanted. And that's what we did. And we did it iteratively and incrementally. We did all those sorts of things. Let me tell you, this was sometime before Scrum. We just understood that this was the way that you would do something like that. And now, then sometime later, I'm introduced to Scrum and I go, yeah, okay, like so many other people do who have had any measure of success. They go, you know what? I think I was doing this kind of stuff and I didn't know what to call it. So we were doing those sorts of things. But here's the essential point I want to make that underscores Al's point, was then when I went into consulting, because I'm all full of myself now, and I think that I can take on the world. So I go into some other engagement and you know what? This sort of thing, it just doesn't work. It just falls right on its head. And the reason it did, well, again, we're trying to sort this stuff out. Well, the team isn't entirely focused. They're on a bunch of other things, and they've been organized according to skill sets instead of in a team. Then in fact, there isn't a real voice of the customer. Nobody went out and found a customer and made them close to you at all. And there's all sorts of bureaucracy because there's a ton of other initiatives underway, and we're all vying for budget. We're all vying for decisions. We're all vying for shared services. We're doing all sorts of things like that. And that was when, back in 2010, to the comment I made in my introduction, and it kind of came to me that, well, there's some kind of, and to be honest with you, my background originally was in programming inventory control systems. So I saw this as a supply chain kind of problem. What am I going to do to solve this supply chain? And Al mentioned just in time. So we're talking about just in time work and working in small batches. We see all these basic concepts. I love some of the stuff we've talked about, how there are some scientific principles we can apply to this regardless of the domain. And if we assemble those correctly, we can get some great results. So anyway, it was at that revelatory moment that it came to me that, yeah, I've got to be thinking about work flowing. I've got to be trying to bang the drum. Let's take our eyes off of idle workers and let's look instead at idle work. Let's look at what happens when the work halts, exactly as Al was saying. You know, that story I told about the 28 months to do basically 4 months worth of work. We did a little calculation. We might have done it wrong, but the calculation we did was basically to change the conversation and open some eyes, and we calculated our process efficiency at 7%. That really made some people sit up in their chairs at that point.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so just in interest of getting to question 3, and this is great, by the way. I'm not. I just want to say we want to kind of move things along, but it's really important stuff. So thanks for sharing with that, Rod. just a thumbs up. Is there still confusion where you guys sit today in discussing value streams or people talking about value streams? Do you think there's still some confusion still out there? Or is it pretty people understand pretty much out there when we talk about value streams that they know what it is?
I think a lot of clients that I have gone into and introduced the use of value streams and value stream mappings are learning about it for the first time. I suspect that was true of your engagement, Rod, when you opened their eyes to their process efficiency being only 7%. I had a very similar situation where the process efficiency was running around 12%. So I think the problem is rampant, and a lot of people haven't had their eyes opened yet.
Awesome. And I'm just, again, these are shameless plugs for the book throwing in there, but we have a core value called, no new silos to break down silos. So, whether you call it Scrum, whatever agile lifecycle you have, and this is a segue into question 3, if you're setting it up as a silo, which I've seen this with DevOps, I've seen this with agile Scrum teams, whatever, suddenly, there's a new silo and it's not connected to the value stream from other value streams that it needs to cross-cut a lot of times. So there's a place for it, as Al said, but we don't want to be creating new silos. So, and that's an important point I think we need to raise out of this, is the value stream starts to show that actually we can't operate as just a team completely independent and devoid of the rest of the business. Things aren't going to work. Operations are not going to put whatever you're doing live, for example. Okay, so unless it's a POC, and that's what remains what it is, and that's a whole nother topic we'll go into another time, how POCs fail. Okay, so number 3, is there a connection between, and we've touched on this, value streams and agile?
And I would say if you look at Scrum and XP, which were basically the starting of Agile, they are in 2 different ways. So take your silo example. So let's say I've got some silo of my UI people and some silo of my devs and some silo of my testers. Then to get anything done, I'm going to have to bandy the work back and forth across those silos. And not everybody's ready to take on the work when it's done, so there's a lot of waiting going on. This is how you get these 7% and 12%. What's called process cycle efficiency. How much time is it actually working? So what Scrum did, and whether they knew they were doing it or not knew what they were doing, or didn't know what they were doing, but they were mirroring what's called a work cell in Lean, where you say, when I got work to get done, I bring all the skills I need to get it done. Now in Lean manufacturing, the technique was you had one person operating 4 or 5 machines that could run the whole thing through. So from start to finish, there was no waiting. This is again the just-in-time. Of course, we're now talking about people doing the work, so you have the cross-functional team. So in a good Scrum team, there are no the handoffs, maybe they happen, but they're real fast. You don't hand things back because you understood, because you're all collaborating. So handoffs, handbacks, and delays in workflow become very much less than they were before. So in that sense, you could see Scrum from a delay point of view. But I've had an insight. I've been thinking about something for months. And somehow in between all this conversation, I got it. See, to me, there's a fundamental difference between extreme programming and Scrum. And I do not mean that one has engineering practices and the other one doesn't. Okay, I mean, that's obvious. But you could put engineering practices in Scrum and they're still different, in my opinion. Even though Scrum people say it's the same, it's not. And here's how I see it. So Joshua Karivsky is very brilliant, done patterns, got, what's his company's name? Industrial Logic. Really, really good, really smart guy. He related extreme programming to Kanban once, or Lean. And if you think about it, test-driven development. What's the cycle? I've got this story. I'm going to figure out what's needed. I got a very small slice. I write it, and I get back. So I've got this little slice that goes from what the customer wants all the way back and done in like 10 minutes, maybe less. I'm more of a 30-minute TDD guy, but some of these people, they do it every minute. It's amazing. And that's an example of also you've got TDD, you've got pair programming, no handoffs, you got CI/CD. This is all agile, and this is all Lean. This is all about flow and looking at the value stream. Now I'm going to say what the difference between the two are, because this was the insight I got. So in Scrum, you're indirectly trying to get this. In other words, if you have time boxes, you've got to go small batches, right? Because it's got to fit in 2 weeks. So it's got to be about 1 to 3 days. Stories should be 1 to 3 days in Scrum if you've got a 2-week sprint. In TDD, so you're indirectly getting small batches. In XP, however, you're directly getting small batches. In Scrum, you have a collaborative team that gets stuff done and you're working together, but in XP, you explicitly pair. Notice how that also limits the amount of work in process, because if you have 8 people, you got 4 things going on at once. The big difference between XP and Scrum to me is Scrum is indirectly trying to get flow. XP is directly trying to get flow. It's a different model. They're not the same, even though they kind of look the same. Anyway, so I'm taking too much time, but I thought that might be
No, that's good. That's good.
I've been thinking about this for a while, and it just hit me that XP is directly applying the rules of flow and lean, and Scrum gets you there, but by indirectly doing the practices and the artifacts. And I think the difference is when you know directly what you're working on, you don't have any boundaries. I mean, you can just do however those work. Whereas Scrum, you have to use iterations, because if you don't, there's nothing then that indirectly works on things. And if you know to directly work on them, then you don't need Scrum's immutable roles, rules, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's a powerful point as well. The connection here is that you look outside the team, right? With Agile, we've already discussed the potential silo issue. So you look beyond the team. You also talked about TDD and XP aspects, which are touching to DevOps and the DevOps mindset. So that's great too. There's a connection between DevOps as well. But for the panel as well, and Al, of course, chime in. Those two things, Agile and value streams, and Agile and DevOps and value streams. What do you guys think the connections are from your perspective, or are there any?
I feel like I'm doing too much talking, but I'm going to say that to me, they are elements of. So I have a value stream, which is, as I said, generically, we're looking at someone requesting some value till it is actually arriving to them. And to your point, which I really like, Brent, the whole idea that with the end customer in mind. So if it's a development value stream, we still want to be thinking that way. If it's an operational value stream, then of course we're thinking that way. But in those particular cases, if this is a development value stream and we're now talking about Agile and DevOps, it's like we're talking about Russian signals to me. So we're looking at Agile being a portion of perhaps a larger DevOps, and actually a value stream being a subsuming or encasing piece of the DevOps portion. That they kind of work that way, because there will be things at the front end of the value stream that don't lend themselves to DevOps. They're going to be something entirely different, which, I mean, we've traveled down this road as a part of our instruction through the DAVSC that Al's been doing, where we're talking about things like even trying to figure out the corporate strategies and initiatives and how they might be realized into business. That's not DevOps, right? But it is nonetheless, it's a part of the value stream when we're trying to construct it developmentally to get something that's going to produce a capability that will support an operational offering. That's a lot of big words. I don't know I'm clear. I hope I've been clear in saying that. Yeah,
for sure. Brilliant. Good points, and actually touches on question 5 as well. Willie, you talked about the 2 a.m. call for a while now, and I'm just calling you out on this. But you know, there's a value to the customer, right, with the 2 a.m. call. Do you want to just mention briefly what the 2 a.m. call is, and I think whether you're following my train of thought here, or not? Go ahead.
Sure, I'll get you the 2 a.m. call. I just want to go back to what Al and Rod was saying. Because the first question you asked is is there a connection between Agile and value streams? And I've always been a fan of Kanban, as you know as well. And one of the key practices is to visualize and limit work in process and deliver smaller batches faster and continuously, as you all know. But what I've realized is that the value streams actually help us visualize all that stuff. Because if you take value streams away, we're all razor focused on I'm developing, I'm testing, and for all of us, that is a value stream. I always say there are many value streams. So for the developers, yeah, they have a value stream, they have a trigger, and they have value going out. But it's not reaching what we refer to in the book as the delighted end user. I mean, that I think is truly where the value stream ends. But where I see the correlation or the kind of agile and value streams coming together is visualizing, because that helps me analyze what the heck's going on, to measure it and to improve. Which brings me to the DevOps one, and I always quote Donovan Brown's definition of DevOps, because he says it's the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And even though it's quite crisp, it says a lot of things. It addresses your silos that you just mentioned, because it's a union, but it's the continuous delivery of value to the end user. So it's all about the end user, which now brings me to the 2 a.m. call. Because I think where DevOps really becomes powerful is when the engineers, and we all engineers, realize that we actually responsible for any of the features we actually ship to the end user. Like, it doesn't end when the build is successful and it's gone and been thrown over the wall. I am responsible for the idea I had and the feature I delivered. And I'm responsible for that feature until that feature is no more. Which means when the phone rings at 2 a.m. in the morning, it actually brings all the engineers together that are responsible for that feature. That's what the 2 a.m. call is about, is to bring everybody who's responsible in the same room to obviously find the root cause and find a resolution. Because none of that stuff is important. It's all part of the value stream, but it's what you have been referring to as these things inhibit us. They are delays. I mean, getting up 2 a.m. in the morning is A, a nuisance, and B, it's really a delay. But what it's about is to find a resolution so that Brent or Al or Björn or Rod, whoever that end user is, when they get up the next morning and they switch on their machine and they go back into their application, they're delighted. They have to be delighted. Otherwise, there's no value.
Yeah.
I want to ask all of you a question, but I know Willie, Brent, and Rod talked about DevOps, and I'm realizing a different way to look at DevOps. I kind of even hate to admit this because I'm probably showing old school here. But I got to set the stage just a little bit. It's, I think, an important question, and I certainly have not been thinking about it this way. So you know the separation we have between dev and test, okay? And you could say that what we've done in an agile team where you have devs and testers working together, you've at least stopped the separation of the handoffs. But and better's not to have dev and test necessarily, but it's like one team with people just working together. Now with DevOps, I started getting into DevOps years ago with a talk that Israel Gott did, where he talked about you've got dev, you've got ops. What you want with DevOps is everybody's on the same page. But you still have, there's dev and there's ops, and they're working together. And there's, of course, a smooth handoff and things. So it's not like you don't have this division. It's like a transition. Like I'm doing mostly dev, then dev and ops, and then ops. And they're all part of the same team, but still separate. But Willie, when I was hearing you talk, and some things you had said, Rod, makes me think, well, maybe not. Maybe there's another way to think about this. And when I think back to the Phoenix project, maybe he was saying this and I didn't get it. Very possible, which is that like we switched where we had developers and testers, and now we just have a development team, okay? DevOps isn't about the seamless integration of developers and ops, but now we have a development ops team where there is no distinction in the same way we don't distinguish between dev and test. We don't, I mean, they have different skills. You know, an operations guy's gonna have ops skills, and but you know what I mean? They're just like, instead of a development team, we now have a DevOps team. It's not a relationship. It's more about the team is expanded. So my question is, how do you think of those two? How do you think about, I'm admitting where I've been thinking, And I'm kind of liking this other way of thinking, but I'm wondering how you're all are thinking about this.
Yeah, Brent, if you don't mind if I jump in, because this has been Brent and I, can I say debating? I won't say arguing, I'll say debating that specific topic of what is an ideal team size in a DevOps, in a healthy DevOps mindset. And Al, what you're alluding to is one of the objectives when I started with DevOps was to say Dev and Ops are one. And then we started saying, oh, hang on, it's not DevOps, it's DevSecOps, because we forgot about the security engineers. Oh, hang on, it's DevArcSecOps. And in the end, it was DevSecArc, whatever, BizOps, because we forgot about the business. So
Yeah.
Don't forget about data.
Oh, data. Oh, yes. There's a lot of roles I've actually forgotten. But I think what you were saying is let's bring all of them into one team, i.e. they're no more silos. I think that's the dream world. That's paradise. But when I go back to reality, it's not possible.
Well, in the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant Workshop, we would call that a focused solution team. And it can be more than 8 people. It can be a group of teams. But the only thing they're working on is getting this solution done. And admittedly, again, I'm saying I'm realizing that I need to rethink DevOps. Expand my view, probably catch up. I think here I'm catching up. I'm not leading. But focus. If you say DevOps is a relationship, then you'd have this focused solution team building something and relating smoothly with ops, and there's a DevOps relationship. But if you do what you just said, no, focused solution teams would have their own ops people in there. That part of operations, part of the development is ops right from the beginning, not just keeping them informed, which is admittedly how I've been doing it. Yeah. See, this is kind of this is actually pretty interesting because
it's unique to the organization. And just get back to Willie's point. The reason why I wanted to raise the 2 a.m. call is you've got the help desk. And the point here is now with the help desk, I'm releasing some value. I want to make sure my end user is getting maximum value. I don't want a long time between them not getting value and value happening. So I'm going to wake up the developer who may or may not wake up the rest of the team. Let's just say with the scenario that Willie's saying, they wake up the whole feature team. This is a huge feature.
Can I just, sorry, Brent, I'm just going to jump in and say 15 years ago, we did this at 3M.
Yep.
I was working in a data warehouse. I was responsible for particular elements of the data warehouse, and I received 2 a.m. calls. I'm not on support.
Yeah, I'm laughing because my wife's walking around in the background, and one of the things she still does not let me forget, when we were just like married a year or two, we went out finally to get some drinks in a bar, and I got this call. It was like about 9 or 10 at night. And, I had to leave her. She's in this bar, and people are trying to pick her up. She said, this is the first time we're still married later. But she's walking around. I'm just thinking, oh, yeah, I remember that time Lee was left in a bar for the equivalent of a 2 a.m. call.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally get it.
So the point, and so we've been doing this, remember when you were the developer that hooked up the computer and connected it, installed the software on it? Okay, So, and that's Willie and I have had this conversation, this is kind of where it all started. DevOps was everything, right, to do it. But my point is that it's not necessarily a group. That's why we're focused on the mindset. I think the connection to the value stream here is if you follow the stream of value, right, you're going to know that the people who should be engaged with are the people who are going to help solve this thing. And it's not just operations. And so once you bring in those folks and you get value to the customer, first of all, you got a happy customer. Second of all, the developers, if it's a bad coding, bad testing, some process changes are going to happen, right? Guaranteed. Some test first maybe mentality might start to go into play. Other things are going to start to come out of it, boil up. And that's what we want to get to. So the value stream, I think, and the connection that we're saying, and I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouth, at least, from the book that we put together, stuff I've seen from Al, yourself, and with Discipline Agile from Scott and Mark, is the fact that we cannot work in isolation. And a value stream starts to pinpoint this. It starts to pull it out. And then the mapping, of course, starts to put some metrics on it. And now we can go back and fix the problematic areas. So it's mindset. I want to stay on that because operationally, organizationally, every customer is different, and the DNA of your organization will influence how you're going to set it up organizationally. But the mindset, I don't think is that different.
You know, here's something to consider to my two book authors here, because I think you guys have the wherewithal to be able to make this work. But this is all about visualization to me, because we've been bouncing back and forth between development value streams where we're producing something that's going to provide a capability for an offering that's to an actual user. And here's where there's a nuance that when I'm talking about dev and test, that's purely development. When we get into ops is now supporting the operational value stream. And so don't you see these value streams now starting to intertwine in some way? And if we start to say that, in fact, that we're using this concept of you build it, you run it, which is what I take from the 2 a.m. call, maybe not exactly, because we are talking about mindset, and it might not be practical to do exactly that. But if we're talking about something like that, then that kind of starts to wind this a little bit more and intertwine the operational and the development value streams that way. I would love to see this visualized in some fashion. I'll tell you, one of the most powerful things that I have ever had the occasion to do, and I don't mean to butter Al up, but this all had to do about a set of slides he had about our inherent problem. The fact that we manage people down like this, but work flows across. And who's attending to the flow of value? That was, honestly, that was mind-blowing to me. And it's been so powerful to present that over and over again. If we could see a way of representing the development value stream and the operational value stream that is enabled, supported, or whatever, and how they cross, intertwine, whatever it is, guys, if you can find a way to visualize that, wow.
And that's the magic, which we'll get to. So let's take that forward to now projects and products, because I think, obviously we could talk about this for a long time, just in the agile perspective with visualization and using tools like that, value stream, which is an awesome tool, and value stream mapping, which is a great tool. Projects and or products. Now I'm with, and Willie and I, Willie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're 100% on this page. We need to move to products. We understand there's projects there, but we need to move to a product awareness. And I think you guys that work in Discipline Agile will see that as well, or seeing that. So what's the connection now? I'm kind of leading this, but the connection between value streams, projects, and products, okay?
Well, I'll pipe up because I'm the guy bumping his gums all the time here, so I'll do some more gum bumping. But the whole deal here, of course, is that once we move to products, then the product itself can be thought of as an operational value stream, or a series of them, perhaps running along and it being intertwined. And so the development value stream, if we are going to, in fact, work developmentally to support the capabilities that are necessary to provide the business offerings, then it only makes sense that we're running along in parallel. And perhaps intertwining as well. To me, it starts to provide something that, if you had to visualize it, it can be almost thought of as a rope or a cable in that way, in the sense that they cross each other, they intertwine and the like. If we start working in terms of projects, that's almost like we've got little short chunks in here that are twined in, but they don't provide any resilience. They don't provide any strength. If I beat a metaphor to death, which is clearly what I'm doing, but if I do that sort of thing, then I see that it doesn't carry the same power as having that long-lived being something that runs along in parallel with it. Anyway, that's enough for me. And
that's great, Rod. And actually, it reminded me of the pizza example that, Al, you were talking about, an operational value stream, but it's still connected to the customer ordering it, which is part of that operational value stream, the people building it. So do you want to, anyone elaborate on that, or do you want to use something else? Because I think that was a great example of.
Yeah, I do have something I want to, because see, actually there are places where you have projects. I mean, so the fact, and I agree, you want this long-term thinking and all that, but what are you wanting to have long-term thinking about? And I would suggest The connection is this: value streams connect the customer or the development group to the customer. So if you're thinking, oh, I have a project mentality where I have something and I get a bunch of people and they work like in an agile way, but they're formed and then disband, then you do it again, you formed and disband. What you've done is you've disconnected the team from the domain knowledge of the customer. And what you sometimes have, though, is you sometimes have a team that actually works on multiple products, but they'll do one for a little while, then they'll go work on another for a little while, and they're intertwining over time, but at any one time, they should be focused on building one chunk of value. And this is, again, where I think the Agile community, there are two concepts. We've been harping on the value stream, but the other one is what feeds the value stream, what goes into the value stream. And right now, and this is another place I think SAFE's been egregious, is you have this idea of an MVP when you're building something new. Well, that's great. But let's think about it. If you're a company that's more than 100 people in development, how often are they building new products and how often are they extending existing products? And those are two different things. With an MVP, you're trying to discover if something's new. So your value stream as you work is going to be as quick feedback loop as I can to discover. Whereas when you've got something that exists and you're trying to incrementally improve it, the big issue there is not just what's the business, but how do the pieces across the organization interact with each other? Because if you're really big, they're not independent teams. That's nice, but no, I'm sorry. If like pizza, again, I'll just use that. I just use that as an example in the workshop. So it's easy. You have you have a platform for customer. You have a platform for the inventory of buying the dough and stuff. You've got a platform for the ordering. You've got a platform for the delivery. You have a platform for the manufacturing. And those interact with each other. And if you're a big development company, you're going to have to have interactions between those things. So when we look at projects, well, I'm sorry, when you look at what comes in, well, what comes in may be one of those teams. What comes in may be needed across multiple teams. This is why I say you have to look at the distinction between the workflow and the people. Because if I've got something that's now running across two teams and they also, each team gets stuff that they only deal with, if you just say, oh, the value stream is all those people, no, you don't, you've lost how you untwine that. You got to look at untangling the value stream. So,
yeah. Excellent. Yeah, good points. Anyone else want to add anything? I know I just want to mention one thing, and because of Willie, again, we discussed this over the last couple of years, and it seemed the right thing to do. I think it's Mick Kirsten, right?
Yeah. His book's brilliant.
So Willie actually introduced me to that book, and I believe he gave me a copy of that book. I read it and actually took it with me to the Atlanta conference where I met Al. But it just resonated really well. Do you want to mention anything about that, Willie, or any thoughts on the project?
I think the reason I obviously introduced you to the book and gave you one, I wanted you to read it, because when I actually went to the first conference where Mick actually presented the flow framework, I mean, flow for me is, again, a series of activities, value stream. That's how I was thinking. But what he was actually talking about is not being on the project level, i.e., again, engineers razor focused, but actually looking at the product, which, Al, you've been chatting about. And what I really enjoyed about his book is he kind of forces you to articulate, like, we need a common language across all these silos, if I may call them that. The taxonomy and the metrics, and it needs to be understandable not by the engineers but by everyone that's part of that value stream. That's been my problem or challenge for the past few years, is kind of the language we've been talking. Nobody understands that. I mean, we use TLAs. That's the biggest sin of our ecosystem, are these TLAs, and it's a 3-lettered acronym. I mean, at times I'm in a meeting or in a discussion where I'm thinking, what are they talking about? I have no idea. And then you realize once they actually explain what these TLAs mean, you say, oh, okay, now I know. But that's been our problem. But I think what Mick has done well in his book is actually he's forcing you to think bigger. He thinks at the product level where the customer comes in. And I always say the customer is king. It's delighted customers. Personally, I love the Gemba walk. Al, you said getting all the right people together. Yes, I think engineers should actually go out and meet the customer, which is why I love the Gemba walk, which you can't do anymore because of the pandemic, because you can't do a Gemba walk with Zoom, unfortunately. So, but
Other
yes,
challenges.
that's what I wanted to say. MEC actually forces us to actually step one level higher,
Yeah,
and expand
yeah.
the value stream to the product and to the business, to the end user.
And I think one of the things that comes out of this too, just on that point, which is super important, and I've seen it at airports and airlines building solutions, is ultimately it's the passenger, right? Passenger gets on the plane's got to land. There's connected to the passenger is the bags and all the other stuff. So if we don't define things properly, and there's multiple definitions, for example, arrival time for an aircraft, depending on who you are. Are you the folks doing the landing and taking care of the movement on the tarmac? Are you the passenger themselves? Are you the taxi driver, the person picking them up? So arrival time is different meanings, believe it or not, from operational, technical to end user. So getting the definition of these terms, you mentioned TLAs, absolutely, but also overloaded. The word value stream may become an overloaded term. I know Agile's definitely one. DevOps absolutely is one. So we have to define these early on and understand there could be multiple definitions depending on your purview, your view and viewpoint. And so we need to have that because the value stream will help us, I think, with that. And that's a key thing. You can really screw up your solution getting the wrong definition.
Yeah, well said, Brent. Value streams are really important because they are generally, when we visualize them with mapping workshops and we lay one out, they're possible for almost anyone to be able to read and understand. And even while Willie was talking, suddenly I'm flashing back to unified modeling language when we're all, for those of us who are old enough to remember UML, and that was an effort for us to have a common taxonomy, common nomenclature when we're trying to share ideas. And don't so many of these things always distill down to how do we share our understanding?
Yeah.
How do we share our understanding? And that's a real problem.
Yeah. And who do we need to talk to share with?
Who do we even talk to? Well said.
Excellent. So good. So just a time check. It's 11 after 4. We got a few more questions. Everyone good to go to 4:30? And wrap up.
Alex noted that he has a hard stop in 4 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, in 4 minutes. Oh, okay. My apologies. All right. So, well, what we'll do, and that's okay with Al, because then we're going to open this up to examples.
Well, I tell you what I can do actually, because I've got to go someplace, but I'll just keep my camera off and I could work and talk at the same time. So I can hang around a little longer. So I could probably hang on around another, I might be able to go till 4:30.
Okay, so we'll have a hard stop at 4:30 because that's maximum time I had on this call anyways. Anyone who wants to send more questions and stuff, we'll take that as maybe a subsequent conversation on this and topics. But I wanted to move on to our VS is important in your business agility adoption. I know we teased some of this up already. We've talked about it. Gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, anybody where you've put value streams into practice or started to use value streams where it's made a difference and is part of your business agility. And again, business agility, I'm including DevOps, including all parts of Agile. It doesn't matter which flavor you have. Are they important?
I'll pipe in right away and say yes, they are for me. I'm sure everybody uses them in different contexts. They're up until the time that most recently we've been applying them more regularly. But in the past, the group I applied them for all the time was data. Because the data guys have a lot of trouble being agile. And if you want to really see how things stop, how work halts, you need to follow a value stream that goes through the data guys. And so I did a lot of that work when I was involved in data warehousing, one form or another. And it changed the conversation. We were able to start thinking in terms of, well, maybe we really, truly do need to think about a way to refactor databases. People struggle with that, right? Because it's more than just the structure unlike changing code, it's also state. So if we start to change those two things, it's quite complicated to be able to do some of those things. Now, we keep coming back to Scott Ambler. Scott Ambler, of course, has written a book called Refactoring Databases, which is an excellent read, by the way. But most people don't know how to do that. And so the first thing you've got to do, though, is build awareness and then desire and then knowledge. You know, we're following ADKAR here, right? That we really want to get people thinking about it. And I found value streams to be an excellent tool to do that. Now, that is like using them as a scalpel, as a surgical instrument, and just in that one spot. But I think I've had my eyes opened just in the last, I'll say, short while, that they are more applicable in broader areas than I've given them credit for.
Brilliant, excellent. And I'm glad you mentioned data, because in the new year, we're going to be talking about agile data and DevOps. And I hope to have Scott on that call as well and helping us with that, because yeah, he wrote the book on it. And in fact, it was back to his site years ago that I came across vertical slicing, which is also in the book. We bring up quite a bit. And it's interesting, at the time that I was, wanting to bring it up as well, Willie was living it, and Matthew, one of the other agents of chaos, was talking about vertical slicing as one of the tools to understand how we can bring data into an agile way of working. So brilliant, excellent. Thanks for raising that.
Let me explain the way I use value streams, both directly and indirectly. I like value stream mapping, but one of the things is systems thinking. So a system, when you're a systems thinker, what you do is you recognize that the system is not the set of components, but is rather the interactions between the components. So like if you took the 50 best cars and got the best parts of the 50 best cars and put them together, you'd have a pile of junk. You wouldn't have a good car because you got good components. It's how does everything relate to everything else? One of the advantages of all electric cars is you basically have a chassis that's a platform with wheels, the motors are on the wheels, and then you can put whatever else you want on top of that frame. That's an example of things interrelating, and you can create new things. Now, if you believe, and I do, that then your work is the relationships between things. And if you think about a value stream is, I do have some inherent handoffs. I mean, between business and dev, you have different people doing work. Then the value stream illustrates the relationship. When you go from one step to another step, the value stream is actually showing you the communication between those two groups. It's actually showing you how value is being added as you hand off from one to the other and how people have to relate to each other. So value streams is another way of looking at the relationships. It's not just the workflow. It's when it goes from one step to the next step to the next step, you're actually demonstrating, and not demonstrating, but illustrating how do the different parts of the value stream relate to each other. And that's that can be very important to see how people should be working together when they're not all on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Yeah, well said.
I think improving business agility also requires something we've been talking about, and that is silo busting. And often we have to look at ways to restructure our organization to eliminate some of those handoffs and optimize more effectively so that value flows better through the organization. And certainly in one of the recent engagements I've been involved in, we were looking at the process of how work gets defined, how decisions get made about what's going to be invested in, and then how ultimately through portfolio management, things move into product management. I think we have to look at the first half of the process, the discovery part, and look at ways that we can improve our business agility in that area using concepts like the minimum business increment that Al has referred to make sure that we have a good development intake process, and that once that is in place, that work can then flow through the development and operations processes as well.
Excellent. Good. Billy, is there any examples from you recently in the last or previous work that you've done where value streams have been really effective for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I want to say is I feel that value streams are important as a hammer in construction. You cannot live without them. At least that's how I think these days, because number one, I've always been a visual person. And we all said we've been doing these things since the 80s. And even with DevOps, I've realized I've been doing that stuff in the 80s. But one of the things I love is visualization, because it allows me to actually put a visual in a coffee area or in a high traffic passage to the washroom. Obviously, all of these things no longer work in our current pandemic, but just putting a visual up on the wall has helped me immensely in kind of the engagement before and at the moment, is to visualize the continuous delivery pipeline to not just the engineers, but to the business as well. Because business is saying, why are these features only trickling out of your engineering environment once in every month or year or whatever? I mean, you hear these horror stories. But with value streams, it helped me, first of all, visualize our continuous delivery pipelines and to identify where all the delays are. Because you've been talking about the efficiency percentage. And when I first calculated our percentages for the various stages, I got a shock and I thought, something's wrong. I made a calculation error and I did it again and again and again. And I realized if you actually get over 10%, you're a master in what you're doing.
Yeah.
But what it allowed me to do is actually take these visuals to all the silos: dev, ops, security, business, architecture, and sit around a table and actually explain this. These are the inhibitors that we are struggling with. This is why it's taking so long. And it allowed us to optimize our pipelines, and by actually it's a continuous improvement. And Brandon, I might actually plug another one of our core values is to improve beyond the limits of today's processes. That's something that is key for me. Is we always believe we have reached the best pipeline, the best TDD lifecycle, the best whatever, but you can always improve. And that's what I realized with the visual value streams, because it's not just everybody walking past and saying, oh, well, can you just explain what this red flag here is and why it says 3%? I walk past those visuals as well and I go, oh, let me actually do this differently. It actually helps me as well. So yes, my true passion is obviously the pipelines, which enables everybody else to have a good value stream, but it definitely helped me identify all the inhibitors, the problems, the delays. And yes, we are in the process of actually re-engineering all our pipelines because we can actually do them better.
Yeah, excellent. Well put. So I've heard, first of all, I'm going to go to Al's point in a second, but, with Rod and Paul, you're talking about silo busting and communications. This is good. With Willie, the visualization now gives you the not empirical data and a real data to have the conversation and simplifies it. So because most of us are visual thinkers, right? And in fact, that's one of the biggest, most powerful things for me to come into really really gravitating to Discipline Agile was the fact that, Scott and Mark talked about modeling, and we have to model first. Always been a modeler. How do you break down complex subjects? You start to model it. That's the only way my brain works anyway. So we model it. So that's an excellent, because you have a bit of a model. You can see where things are happening. So that's brilliant, guys. I think that's part of the real powerful aspect of visualization. Got visualization on the brain. Of value streams is the visualization. But also, I want to mention another super powerful thing that Al talked about. If you thought, hey, if we brought the best parts together, we would make the best product, for example, the car. And we use that actually in the lean training that we do. We're Discipline Agile analogy, I believe. So why doesn't that work? Well, again, it's back to cognitive bias. And I made a note of that at the beginning. Cognitive bias, we go in thinking, oh, well, that team doesn't talk to this team. Or whatever the case may be. You can't see the thing. It's like the iceberg, right? You can only see things up above because that's where you're focused, but there's a ton of things below. How big's an iceberg? Well, it's a lot bigger below usually than it is on top, right? So the cognitive biases start to disappear when we start to use value streams, I think would be a fair statement. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I can see a lot of power there. And that's helped me.
Yeah, I like the way you're putting that, Brent. Yeah, and I think inherently, for those of us that have been in this game for a long time, one of the things we have as part of our experience, our shared experience undoubtedly, is that if there are problems in any given system, it's between the components. That's not to say that there can't be a problem within a component, you know, whatever it is. And you can think whether this is physical or whether this is purely software, but the problems tend to be in those interface points, whether that is a user interface, whether it's an interface to the business layer, whether it's an interface to the data layer, whatever those interface points are, that's where the problems tend to be. And you know, perhaps it's serendipitous that this seems to apply to working in teams and with people, but I suspect that there's some bigger issue at play here, that in fact, our problem is always at the interface between any completely atomic unit. And that includes people, and then I'll extend that to teams as well. And that's why, you know, we can do things to break teams down so that we collapse the teams, so that in your point of a mindset, we have a DevOps team, which obviously includes all the elements of dev, including testing, and we start to add sec, and maybe we add data in as well, and then perhaps biz. Whether that's a mindset, we start to collapse those down to improve the interface points. And of course, this also bears, if we're breaking down the teams or collapsing the teams, if you will, so breaking down the silos, collapsing the teams in such a way that we have fewer of these handoffs. Another way to ensure that is this whole idea of the generalizing specialist, so that just like it's been figured out in lots of other places, if I can do multiple jobs, that's going to be more effective than me handing my work off to somebody else, because there will be a loss of knowledge or a loss of flow or a loss of something in the act of doing that. And so this just seems to be an observation. You know, Al is the scientist, so maybe Al's got some scientific hypotheses around this, but I'll tell you that observationally, and again, I may be falling prey to availability bias, but that seems to be the case.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to follow up on what you said, because I think it's dead on. When you talk about, and you take it a step further than what I said, where I said it's about handoffs and things like that, which it is. I mean, it has a large part of it. But if you think about it, if you don't have to hand off, you don't have these interfaces. DevOps, by joining the two, you don't have a DevOps interface anymore. You have DevOps as a thing. And I think that's really a lot of the key concept you're talking about here.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that's another mechanism, is if we can eliminate an interface and make it so there's not a handoff, we're more efficient, more effective because of doing that directly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excellent. So
And I think when that happens, there's
make it
much
quick, Paul.
better. Pardon?
To make it quick, we got 3 minutes.
There's much better understanding of what the needs are from an upstream and downstream perspective, right? So people have that holistic perspective when that happens.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to cut you off. That was really succinct, brilliantly succinct. Absolutely. And in fact, that's why, you know, top down and bottom up model, a lot of times when I go into organizations to help them become more agile, we got to define what that means for them. Business agility, that's what we typically do. We have to do top down and bottom up. Brilliant. Okay, excellent points. Thank you. I know we could go on. I just want to mention a couple of things. Where can people go more and learn more about this? I think two things. One is obviously Al, Net Objectives now is on PMI.org. The Value Stream Consultant, the DA Value Stream Consultant, it's a new certification coming out next year. Again, that's listed on PMI.org. You can get there. And I will put the links up afterwards to complement this. Gents, if you want to send, if you're okay with me to send your LinkedIn or Twitter or anything like that, please do with your blessing, of course, and I'll have that there if people want to reach out. I want to thank everyone for your time, extended time for some. You're all very busy, but I think this is super important and very powerful, especially what we need to be today with COVID. Value streams need to really be understood and really analyzed by our leaders to make our organizations not only effective, but I think basically around. You know, it's kind of if you don't know your value streams, how long are you going to really survive? It's probably where we're going to be at soon. So thank you again. Anybody want to say anything? 10 seconds or so as a goodbye.
I'm going to say thank you, Brent and Willie, for putting this together. This has been really fun, and I think certainly educational.
I echo that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Al.
Yeah, this has been really good.
Good. All right.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. Okay, excellent. Hope you
We'll
got
have another
value.
one soon. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Excellent.
All right.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.